Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to ChannelBK. My name is Brian. Welcome to another music review. Finally, we're back with these. And this one is for the new Mumford Sons album, Wilder Mind. Mumford Sons is a folk rock band, and this is their third album in their discography, following up their past two albums. And they've been around for a minute. 2009, Sigh No More was their first album, and I like some of the tracks off there, mainly the singles like The Cave and Little Lion Man. And then their 2012 sophomore album, their Grammy Award-winning Best Album of the Year, Babel, came out. And yet again, I like some of the tracks off there, especially some of the singles, and including some of the deeper cuts, which I thought were great too. And it was a little bit of a progression for Mumford Sons. Now, everyone sort of knows Mumford Sons for being a very particular type of music. It's very clean, it's very simple, and I've never had a problem with that. I think my appeal to them has always been the group themselves, mainly because they're always so energetic and have so much fun when they perform, especially Marcus Mumford, who he can sing goddamn Old MacDonald, and I feel enthralled by it. But some of their simplicity works for me, and I think sometimes it hinders them down for being very clean. But with that cleanness, we get some very energetic tracks, we get some great banjo, and we get some very nice lush instrumentation on it. In terms of lyrical content, sometimes it's the same and very simple and basic that we know about. But with this album, Wilder Mind, they were going to be going a little bit more electric, and I was sort of interested in what I was going to hear. There was a couple singles that came out, The Wolf, Believe, and Snake Eyes. So with all of these songs sort of coming out and me listening to it, I was intrigued. And also because, putting your opinions of the music and the band aside, I really find it inspirational that they sort of feel like they need to keep changing. They don't want to make, as they said, like the same shit, because they want to sort of evolve and advance. And I thought that's kind of commendable of them, even though I don't necessarily love them. I think that's cool for a band to acknowledge, you know, we don't want to do the same cookie cutter type of music. We want to change it up. So again, I was interested in seeing what they were going to do with that sound. And so I am here to finally review Wilder Mind, but I'm not going to be doing it alone. I have a good friend of the show that's going to be helping me with this review, Rewind Reviews. Great guy, great reviewer. With that being said, we're going to go to that review right now. Oh my god, I know that was really jarring, guys. But welcome to the review. It's actually here now, Mumford & Sons, Wilder Mind. Welcome to the hashtag new haircut club, as you can tell from both of us. I'm joined by a guest, good friend of the show, Rewind Reviews. How's it going, man?
I'm doing all right. Got a new haircut, as you mentioned. Feeling fresh. Feeling fresh.
I know for us, we've sort of been really quiet about sort of our opinions because we thought this would be cool to sort of have our thoughts out here. So I guess what is sort of, not necessarily like in-depth details on Mumford & Sons, but sort of beforehand and then going into this album, and then just in general, what you think of it?
Well, I mean, before this album, I didn't really know much about this band. I'd obviously heard some of the big singles, Little Lion Man, I Will Wait. I thought they were okay, catchy, but not really sticking around in my head. And then to prepare for this review, I decided to listen to a bit of their last album, Babel, I don't know. And I got about 4 or 5 tracks in, and I thought it was like one of the most boring things I'd ever heard. So I turned it off because I just thought I'll just go into this new album fresh then, because I really didn't have the time to listen to that. And then obviously going into this album, they've decided to go electric, get rid of all the folky influences. So I thought it would be quite interesting, and I think it's definitely an improvement from the band. Definitely.
Yeah, see, that's really interesting that you say that because, you know, for me, I've always been somebody like, I don't know about you, but I've never really dug too deep into folk music. Like, I've only really dug into certain stuff. Like, I remember years ago, I listened to Fleet Foxes for the first time because when I was starting my videos, and I really liked what they were doing. It was really like crazy and epic. So that was really my only real draw. And like, I've always been very much on the side of, even though they're very clean and they're very sort of, you know, very normal sounding.
Safe.
Oh, yeah, safe. Yeah, that's a good word. Safe folk rock, where it's like there's a lot about hearts and a lot about love and a lot about loss and all that sort of stuff. I've always found the drive of Marcus Mumford and company just like so incredible. And like when you see them live, they just like have so much passion. And it's like, again, in the intro part, I was like, he could sing Old MacDonald to me, and I'd just be in a trance because he'd just be so into it. But I'm actually kind of disappointed in this album. I think they didn't do like, I feel like it's an improvement where they're doing something a little different, and I like sort of the electric stuff, but I feel like they lose a lot, for me anyways, because like on a couple tracks, Marcus Mumford did not sound good to me. Like he sounded
definitely. He had some weak tracks.
And he didn't, like, it never felt like I didn't get as much, because even on like some of the softer tracks on the other albums, I think he does a good job keeping somewhat of that passion and stuff. And I think where like the cleanliness of some of these tracks, like I think some of them are fun. Like I think Wolf is really fun, and I think Snake Eyes is a good track. But I only liked the first, like I started the album, like I liked it. I thought Tompkins Square Park was nice, and I thought, okay, this is kind of a nice intro. And then Believe, which ironically we would talk about that track, it kind of grew on me because, again, after listening to this album and hearing how he actually has a lot of passion in the instrumentation on that, I thought it was really cool, like that big build at the end. And then the Wolf, I thought was good. And then I just, wow, I didn't really find myself. I thought there was interesting stuff on each track, but I got super bored. Like Snake Eyes brought me back because I thought that was a really moody track with the big build again at the end, like Believe. And then, weirdly enough, the only track I found interesting, like I dug, was Only Love, which is the second to last track, because I thought,
I think that's the track,
because like there's interest, like it's really, again, like really warped instrumentation. It sounded like, I don't know if it was just his vocals like layered or if it was all of them together, but I love their vocal delivery on it, and I thought that song sounded really good too. But other than that, it's like sometimes it struggled, and sometimes it didn't feel like there was enough. Like I wish there was extra instrumentation, like if they added like some of their folk elements, like if they did like a banjo or something along those lines. I was actually kind of disappointed with this album because it just kind of sounded samey.
Oh yeah, definitely. I get what you mean there. I think starting off, Tompkins Square Park, fantastic track. Believe, bit bland, but by the end, that like kind of climax at the end is really good. The Wolf's really good, and same as you. After that, it gets a little stale and boring and samey. And by the end of this, I'm just like bored to death, to be honest. Even though I did say this was an improvement, I'm still not really enjoying it as much as I would hope, I suppose. Especially from the singles like The Wolf, which I did love, you know?
That's why, like, I think I like Believe a little bit more because, like, after listening to the album, I was like, wow, this is actually a track that I'm getting something from, you know, Marcus in the group. And, you know, after looking at my notes, I kind of screwed up because I was correct on this. But Tompkins Square Park, unlike, there was a lot of tracks like this on the album. Like, I think Just Smoke was another thing where, like, the chorus I loved. I thought the chorus sounded great musically. But then
that's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, but then, like, the verses, it almost sounded...
Nothing happens in the verses.
Yeah, like...
They took away all the instrumentation, those pianos, the guitars, and it's just like this soft, subtle synth line in the background that you don't even notice because it isn't rapping at all.
Yeah, that's Just Smoke and Tompkins Square Park. Even though I really like Tompkins Square Park, that's the thing I hated about those two tracks. Because Just Smoke started very just like fun and loud, and then the verse is super synthy. Like it reminded me of, like, I know this is a weird comparison, but like bad Fall Out Boy synth, where like sometimes they don't do that synth rock, like sort of artificial rock good, but sometimes they don't really know how to. And that was me, where it was like the choruses on like Tompkins Square Park and Just Smoke were like really loud and very like grand, but then when it got to the verses, it just sort of like Just Smoke was also one of the tracks where I was sounding about Marcus Mumford sounding weird. He kind of struggled on that track to me. Like he sounded weird.
I mean, I think with Tompkins Square Park, that is the best songs on the album in my opinion. It's emotive, it's got a passionate vocal performance, it's got some of the most interesting guitars, the drums have a really nice sound to them that isn't all that clean, but the verses are still very sterile and just boring. Nothing happens in them, even though that is one of my favorite songs on here. It's still a bit disappointing that they didn't manage to keep up that energy throughout the whole track, because it really does get kind of annoying after listening to this album a few times.
And I think that's sort of my idea of like not enough added instrumentation, because even on like some of the softer tracks, like for example, tracks like Monster and Cold Arms, which Monster is a little bit more electric and it's more of like a slow jam, whereas like Cold Arms is an acoustic track. I actually kind of like some acoustic tracks from them. But again, like on their other albums, I think they do a good job with the instruments that they have, and it sounds a little bit more intriguing rather than like very samey. Like, and that's the thing that I hate. It was like, if you're going to go electric, which again, I think that's awesome that they don't want to try and make the same type of music, but just don't use electric instruments. And then, because it doesn't work. Like, I think samey and sort of clean works better with the banjos and all that, because it still kind of sounds fun and sort of rhythmic. Whereas on this, it just is like very bland rock music. And that's why like those two tracks in particular was like, I'm pretty sure I've heard better acoustic, like slower tracks from them. It's just this time it just sounds like any other slow rock track in a way.
I mean, I did like Cold Arms for the most part, those kind of jangly guitars that blend together, and they kind of slightly sound like ukuleles or something, which I'm always a fan of. And it's a really emotive track, but it's still not great, and I think a lot of it suffers from not enough instrumentation, you know. And them going electric again, as well as you, I think that it's a great idea. Good on them for not wanting to make the same album again. But especially on the verses of these tracks, they don't use their electric guitars. They're just like, they seem really uncomfortable with it, and so they just take them away and have one continuous synth note over and over again, and that's all you get for the verses. And it really sucks, because some of the instrumental climaxes on this album, like on Only Love and Believe, really show that this band have a lot of talent with their instruments, but they don't use them often enough on this album.
Yeah, and like, I don't know if it was just me not really maybe just catching a lot of the stuff, but I actually thought in terms of lyrically, this album did a better job, sort of, not necessarily cutting out all the typical stuff they talk about, but it felt like there was a lot less of this is a very normal statement. Like, that was kind of what their last albums have been, where it's like they say a line where it's like thousands of other bands have said something, like in terms of love. And I was gonna say a line. This was the only line that really caught me. I know there's probably stuff on most of the tracks, but it was on Broad Shoulder Beast, where one of the lines, I think it's the chorus, where he says, "It's all right, take it out on me." And I was like, oh God. That was like one of the more apparent, like, oh my God. Like, that was the only time. And like, it has this, and again, like, I thought the pianos were kind of interesting on like the chorus, because it's like this big, like it's, and I love the guitars. Like, I thought it was, again, a very driving chorus. But when it got to the chorus, and that was the way he was, and even on that, he kind of sounded a little like raspy on that part. So I don't know what was up. I've heard much better in terms of singing. Like, I think Snake Eyes, like the end of Snake Eyes, he does a good job. The Wolf, like that whole guitar breakdown, I thought he sounded like
fantastic,
super passionate.
Personally, I did actually like his vocal delivery on Broad Shoulder Beast, you know, because it sounds a bit more raspy. He doesn't sound so clean. I don't know, I just find him boring a lot of the time. But on a lot of these tracks, he is very passionate, which I can definitely appreciate. I think he is a good vocalist, but I think he, due to the talent that he seems to have, needs to push himself a bit more on some of these songs, like he does on The Wolf, where he's really passionate and powerful, because some of these songs he does just sound a bit boring, especially, again, on the verses, where nothing is happening at all.
I think Snake Eyes was probably one of the best examples of, it was very quiet, but it had a really like eerie sort of build up, because it was a little bit more of like an atmospheric sound to it. And like, even like the drums, which do sound a bit synthy, like the little drums before the big breakdown, I thought actually kind of worked with what they were trying to do in that track. Because that was one of the other tracks. Like, I think Believe is sort of the same way, where I think it's not as much so, because I think Believe was very much kind of typical and like, okay, and then just the big hoorah at the end. But I think that track did a good job too of being very quiet, and then when it hits, like, you really feel that impact. And I thought that those two tracks did a really good job, because again, they are very, very similar. Whereas Snake Eyes is kind of the riffs still follow with the song. Believe is very much like has the slow pace to it, but then once it hits that break, it just goes bananas and they just go all out on that.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked that breakdown on Believe as well as on Snake Eyes, where they managed to really bring a build up that was quite eerie and haunting, which is really good. Same on Only Love, the 11th track on this album. I think we do the same thing. But I think that one has the best kind of instrumental climax or breakdown or whatever you want to call it on the album, in my opinion, just because it's one of the most powerful ones and the percussion is on point throughout that whole song. But I like all the breakdowns on those 3 tracks. They really work well. I just wish that more happened in, before that.
There was a lot of gems, like in terms of what they did on a lot of the tracks. Because again, it's like for what I guess judge them from, or from my experience with this type of music, it's not like I have a lot of real room. But I still understand sort of the simplicity and the basicness. But I feel like if they want to take this sound, I think examples like Snake Eyes and The Wolf worked very well. But then the other times where either they kept repeating that sort of thing, or they just were very, like, I think The Wolf is an example of, it's not the most overly complicated song in terms of what they're doing, but I think that is sort of old Mumford & Sons in terms of like their instrumentation and their passion mixed with what they're trying to do electrically. Like, I think that was sort of the culmination of what they could have done on this album. And something like Snake Eyes, where they got a good mood, or Tompkins Square Park, which again is like a very great intro to this album. Something like Only Love, where I think that was, to me, a great track. And I think Hot Gates was the track that was last. I completely forgot about that track. I think Only Love might have been a better way to sort of close the album, because
definitely, yeah. Hot Gates was a bit of a disappointment in the end.
Yeah, kind of felt like that was really, in all honesty, one of the tracks where I didn't have an opinion, good or bad. It just kind of went, and I'm like, okay, I don't think that was a good end to the album.
And especially Hot Gates, like every time I've listened to this album, and it would just completely wash over me, and then I wouldn't remember it when I'd finished the album. And when I finally sat down to properly listen to this, and I was like, I'm just gonna listen to this song, and it just feels very plodding and slow and boring, because there's, again, just nothing going on. And so I thought that was a really, really disappointing closer, especially compared to Only Love, the previous track, which would have closed the album off very well. I feel like on this album, Mumford & Sons have kind of, on a lot of these tracks that aren't so good, taken their old sound, taken old Mumford & Sons songs, and just like replaced the folk elements with electric guitars. But they really have to, rather than just doing the same thing that they did but with different types of instruments where they're plugged in, they need to actually mold their sound around the instruments that they're using, because otherwise it doesn't work so well.
They had a lot of good intentions going into it, and I think one of the biggest examples is the idea of the drums, because that's something that is obviously very prominent, and it's never really been super prominent in their other stuff. I think that's sort of a big piece, as well as the electric instruments. And I think that the drums, for example, again, I thought they were fine on The Wolf, even though they're very clean and very just like whatever. I think sometimes the drums work when everyone else is doing something that's at least entertaining or very grand or interesting. Whereas like on most of these tracks, I feel like the drums, I think maybe didn't need to be there, because I think at certain tracks, the band still held their own. And I think that's something that they're still at least trying to keep over, is they could still hold their own. Sometimes the experimentation didn't work, in that I wish they brought in some of that banjo and stuff, because that would have gave a little bit more of an interesting root sound. Even if it was like clean and very simple, it would have added something to the track, I thought.
I mean, yeah, overall, I think they could have just added a bit more instrumentation to some of these songs to make them a bit more interesting, because the talent is there, as shown by some of those big breakdowns, and especially just the whole of The Wolf, because that's a fantastic song in my opinion, definitely the best on the album. I think they could have just pushed themselves a bit more with adding more things to this album, rather than just being like, okay, we've got these instruments here, there are old instruments, let's just replace all of them and do a new album. An old Mumford & Sons record, but electric. It really didn't feel like they'd changed all that much when you actually properly listen. So that Wilder Mind, that title track, Marcus Mumford on the song sings like, I have been blessed with a wilder mind. And I think this whole album goes against that statement completely, at least for the most part, because this album is in no way wild at all. He's not showing off his wilder mind that he's talking about on here. It's very bland, safe, but I can't call it a bad record. For what it is, it does what it does okay. The songs aren't bad. It is just very, very boring. So I'm feeling just right in the middle, 5 out of 10 on this one.
There's certain elements in each track that I love. I think the first 3 tracks laid the album out great. Snake Eyes is good. I think Only Love is great. But just overall, I think a lot of these tracks are very forgettable or just weak. I'm kind of feeling it on the fence. Thank you guys for watching this review. Thank you if you came over from Rewind Reviews. Hopefully you can subscribe. And if you're one of my subscribers, go subscribe to my boy, Rewind Reviews. He does good stuff. You know, he does good stuff. If you like the video, give it a like. If you want to subscribe, obviously, once again, go subscribe. I'm going to keep telling you guys to go subscribe to Rewind Reviews. He's my boy. Thank you so much for joining me on this review, dude.
Oh, yeah, man. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. And I'd just like to say thank you to you, Mr. Brian, for letting me appear on your channel to all of your 190-something subscribers.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Exactly. So, yeah, guys, thank you for tuning into Channel BK. Peace out.
Peace out, yeah.